What's up guys, Firewolf here, giving you a full step-by-step tutorial guide on the ASUS TUF GT502 Ryzen case. ASUS has sent over a bunch of fire components to make this icy white build possible. This video is crazy long, but I'll have timestamps so you can feel free to skip ahead or come back whenever you're lost. All the components will be listed in the description down below, along with affiliate links which help support my channel, but your time is worth more to me, so thank you, and I hope this guide inspires you to start your PC build and earn a subscribe from you. Here are all the components that we're going to be using for this all-white GT502 Ryzen build. Starting with the best gaming CPU, the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D, 8 cores, 16 threads, and 3D V-Cache for amazing gaming performance. For the GPU, we'll be going with the white ROG STRIX 4090, and I'll also be showcasing the TUF Gaming 4070 Ti Super as well. For the motherboard, we're going to go for the ROG STRIX XA70A Gaming Wi-Fi, a beautiful white aesthetic board. For the RAM, I'll be going for the G.SKILL Trident Z5 Neo RGB, 64 gigs, 6000 mega transfers, and it comes with AMD EXPO. Whichever RAM that you go for, I highly recommend checking the QVL list to make sure that your RAM is compatible for whatever motherboard you decide to go with. Power in this build is going to be the TUF Gaming 1000 watt 80 plus gold PSU. And for the AIO, we're going to be going for one of the best that ROG has to offer. This is the ROG Ryujin 360 ARGB Extreme. This is definitely a very powerful AIO, so I'll be showcasing both the Ryujin and the LC so you get an idea of how these AIOs can look on this specific build. For our NVMe drive, we'll be going for the Samsung 990 EVO Plus 2 terabytes. And for the fans, we're going to be using the ASUS TUF Gaming TR120 Fans. And what's great about these type of fans is that they come in standard and reverse as well. And this particular case here supports 10 fans on the front, but there is a really awesome twist on this case. On the rear, you can actually fit an additional 3 fans, making for a total of 13 fans. So it's up to you if you want to maximize the airflow with 3 additional fans, but just having 10 fans should be more than enough. Generally, you want 6 reverse blades and 4 standard fans for that 10 fan setup on the front. And finally, for optional accessories, we have the Lian Strimer wireless cables. I have the motherboard 24-pin, as well as a 12-volt high-powered GPU cable. An optional accessory to showcase your graphics card, I'll be using the Cooler Master Vertical Holder Kit V3, but I'll also be showing you both configurations with horizontal and vertical as well. And finally, for the case, we're going to be using this awesome looking all-white GT502 Ryzen. And what I really like about this is that it comes with these little straps that hold a ton of weight, making it very easy to transport. So I'm really excited to create this all white build. So first step is setting up our motherboard. Alright, now we're ready to set up our motherboard, and here we'll be installing the CPU, RAM, and any NVMe drives that you might have. Now, whenever you're working on your motherboard, my biggest recommendation is to always pull up the user manual, just in case. It does help out with knowing where all the components go on your specific motherboard. Now, most new modern motherboards unfortunately don't come with the actual user manual anymore, so you do have to pull it up on their website and have it on standby. I will be referencing the manual as well, in case we have any type of lane sharing or anything like that, which I'll definitely go over. Now, the first step is installing the CPU, and we're going to be focusing on this area over here. Now, this is the CPU socket cover, so all we have to do is push this latch down to the right and then lift this whole latch up. Lift this cover up. That's going to expose the socket pin, so be very careful you don't drop anything on it. Next, we're going to grab our CPU, making sure we're very gentle. And with any AM5 CPU, you want to locate that triangle on the top left, which will match the triangle on the CPU socket cover as well. And you also have notches on the top and the bottom, which also lines up perfectly as well. So let's go ahead and drop it down. The next thing is to drop the cover down, and we're going to bring this latch back down. Now, as you're pulling it down, there is some force, so make sure you just pull it all the way down and back into this portion over here. Then you go ahead and take off the socket cover, and just like that, we have the CPU successfully installed. Now, in this step, I'm going to be installing a CPU contact frame, which is going to be completely optional. You don't really need to have a contact frame. I just like having the contact frame, replacing the original CPU frame. Now, when you get the contact frame, they're going to give you this Allen wrench with the bit that you're going to need to use to unscrew the original CPU socket cover, as well as 4 screws that we are going to be replacing. Now, I do have a precision screwdriver that has that bit, so I'll be using my precision screwdriver instead. So to install the contact frame, we want to first release the pressure of the original CPU frame. And then you want to lift this cover up again. Now, while you're working on removing the original CPU frame, my recommendation is to place your CPU in first, so that way the pins on the socket are fully protected just in case. Now that you have the cover up and the latch down, you can go ahead and unscrew the 4 screws. Now these screws don't go all the way out, so just loosen them up completely. Once all 4 screws are loosened up, go ahead and grab this latch and the top, and you can just lift it up. Just like that. Go ahead and close this completely. Attach your CPU cover and make sure you save this just in case you want to revert it back. Now you're ready to drop in the CPU contact frame. Make sure the CPU is installed first. Dropping this in is very easy. You just fit it just like a puzzle. And then you're going to use 4 screws to screw them in place. Now we have the contact frame successfully installed. All right, now you're ready to install some RAM. I'll be using the G.SKILL Trident Z5 Neo RGB, 64 gigabytes and 6,000 mega transfers. Now to install RAM, you're going to focus on this side over here. We have a total of 4 DIMM slots. Now it's also important to know how they are labeled. Starting from the left, it is labeled A1. Next is going to be A2. And then the third one is going to be B1, followed by the last one, B2. If you're only going to install 1 RAM, you want to only populate A2. If you're going to be using 2, like I am, you want to populate A2 and B2. And of course, if you're going to be using a total of 4, then you can go ahead and populate all 4 DIMM slots. Now that we know that, on the top, we have tabs that you need to push down. So since I'm using 2, go ahead and drop down A2 and then B2. And depending on which motherboard you have, some motherboards have additional tabs on the bottom over here, which you also need to drop down. But this motherboard only has a tab on top, so I don't have to worry about that. Next thing you want to do is grab your RAM. And you want to make sure you line up the notch with the silver trim. As you can see, it does not match up. So if I flip it over, you can see that now the notch aligns. So I know this is the right way to do it. And all we have to do is slide this RAM right on top. You can go ahead and push it down slightly. Same thing for the next one. Make sure you line up the notches. Go ahead and slide it down. And then the last step is to push it in completely. I like to apply force on the bottom and then the top. So you're going to hear 2 clicks. Same thing for the second one. All right, now we have our RAM successfully installed. All right, next step we're going to do is install 2 of our NVMe SSDs on our motherboard. Now, if you're going to be using this specific one, the X870-A, my recommendation is to also pull up the M.2 rubber, which is located inside the box. If you have an NVMe that is single-sided, so for example, this 990 EVO Plus has all of the components right on top, and you'll notice as soon as I flip it over, it's pretty much flat, letting us know that this is a single-sided NVMe. If it was a dual-sided or double-sided NVMe drive, then you'll be seeing these type of components also on the other side. In that case, you don't really need this. Now, this is optional, but I recommend it for maximum contact with the heatsink. What's really awesome about this motherboard is that the primary Gen 5 slot right over here has a very easy pushing mechanism. It's just push, and this whole M.2 heatsink comes right off, making it very convenient if you're just going to be installing just one NVMe. Now, for the additional 3 sockets, I am going to need a screwdriver to unscrew these 4 screws, which I'll be doing right now. All right, on this motherboard, the screws don't come all the way out, so make sure you loosen them up completely, and this whole bottom heatsink comes out. All right, so on the Strix X870-A, we have a total of 4 M.2 sockets. The top 2 M.2s, labeled 1 and 2, can support an NVMe up to Gen 5, and both of these M.2s are directly connected to the CPU. The final 2, labeled 3 and 4, can support up to Gen 4, and these 2 are connected to the chipset and then routed to the CPU. Now, always reference your motherboard, but in this case of the X870-A, our second NVMe socket does share bandwidth with the primary GPU express lane, which is this one over here. This is where your GPU normally goes. It has a total of 16 lanes. In this example, if I populate an NVMe on the second socket, then the main GPU slot will be reduced from 16 lanes down to 8 lanes, basically reducing the bandwidth in half. Knowing that, you want to have your best drive located on your main M.2 socket, which is going to be this one on top. And depending on your motherboard, you might have a sticker that's going to reveal the thermal pad. So make sure you remove this. And since I mentioned earlier, you'll notice on this motherboard here, we have 2 little circles, which will fit this M.2 rubber. And this is specifically for single-sided NVMe drives. It is optional, but I recommend it since it provides maximum contact. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that. And it fits literally just like little Lego pieces. You just put it on top. And again, you only want to do this if your NVMe is single-sided. Now you're ready to install our first one. So make sure you line up this notch over here with the notch on your motherboard's M.2 socket. Once you have that lined up, you can go ahead and push it in an angle. And once that's in, you can go ahead and push it all the way down. Thankfully, this XA78 has an easy latch system, so as soon as I push it down, it locks it in place without having to do anything else, which is an awesome feature. And then for my final NVMe drive, I'm going to populate socket number 4, which is going to be the bottom right. And this one also has a section to put the M.2 rubber, since this 970 EVO Plus is also single-sided. So I'm going to go ahead and put this M.2 rubber right over here. Line up the notches. Push it in. And go ahead and push it all the way down. Same thing, the XA78 has a very easy system. All you have to do is push this tab all the way to the back. And that goes all the way in. Very easy. Now again, depending on your motherboard, you may have to screw these in. So follow your motherboard's manual. Thankfully, the XA78 makes it very easy to install these drives. Now you're ready to install our M.2 heat sinks again. So the first thing you want to do is flip them over and make sure you remove the sticker, which is going to be the thermal pad. And with that removed, we can go ahead and position this right in. Just push it back in, just like that. And then finally, for our last M.2 heatsink, we want to remove the stickers depending on how many NVMe's we're actually using. Since I'm only using one and it's located on the bottom right, I want to, of course, remove the one on the bottom right. Then we can go ahead and flip them over and place it right on top, and then go ahead and screw them in. All right, and now our motherboard is prepared. We're about 95% done with our motherboard prep. What's really missing here is replacing these original pieces here with whatever standoff or bracket your AIO has. If you want, you can go ahead and do that now, but I'd rather save that step for when I'm covering the AIO. For now, we can place this motherboard to the side and go ahead and prep up our case. All right, now you're ready to prep up the GT502 Ryzen case. What I really like about this case, it has a toolless design to remove the panels. So starting with this front glass panel, there is a button that you push, which is this right over here. Just push it, and this whole thing comes off. You just lift it up. Very easy to take off. Then you want to come over here on the fronts, and this front glass also comes off very easy. There's no buttons at all. You just push it towards you, and this whole piece comes off. And then for the back, we also have a button right over here. Same thing, we're just going to push it, and this whole back panel comes off very easy. And to remove the top panel, we do have to remove these straps. So you just unstrap it. So with that out of the way, you can just lift this up carefully. And this whole top piece comes off effortlessly. So in total, we were able to remove 4 panels without the need for any type of screwdrivers or thumb screws at all. So I really loved how easy that was. And now you want to go on the back of the case and prep this up. So taking a look at the back of the case here, we can see this dedicated fan bracket here so that you can either install 3 additional fans. You can even add a 360mm radiator here as well. And we have a couple of hard drive and SSD bays as well that I want to just clean up so that way we have as much space as possible to work with. Starting off with a hard drive bay, I personally never use these, so that's always the first thing to go. So one screw down here and another one up here. And these have thumb screws, so they're very easy to take out. This fan bracket here, we have a total of 4 screws. All right, now that we have all 4 screws out, this should come off very easy. And finally, I want to remove these 3 pieces here because I won't be using any type of physical SSDs. We have a whole bunch of screws that we just have to unscrew. All right, the first one's out. Second one out. All right, and the last one is finally out. So now we have a whole ton of space here to add our 3 fans here, or we can also side mount our AIO here as well. All right, now that we have our case nice and prepped, we're ready to install the motherboard. So my recommendation is to lay the case completely flat down. All right, now we're ready to install our motherboard. But before we do that, I want to point out that this case does support 3 different motherboard form factors. You have your standard ATX, and it also includes mounting holes for micro ATX motherboards and also ITX motherboard as well. Now inside the accessory kit, they do give you this Phillips socket here, which allows you to use a Phillips head screwdriver, and you'll be able to easily remove these standoffs if you ever need to change the positioning if you have a micro ATX motherboard that you want to use. With that out of the way, we can now grab our motherboard here, and I like to use my left hand inside the IO opening over here so that as I'm dropping it down, I can use this to guide it and be as gentle as possible so I can find the right placement. Once you find the perfect placement, you want to go ahead and find yourself 9 motherboard screws, which is going to be found in the accessory kit, and they're going to look just like this. Then you take a screwdriver and you screw all 9 in. Now for the middle screw here, some motherboards, depending on their M.2 heatsink, may be covering this hole completely. In that case, go ahead and remove your M.2 heatsink so that way you can screw this middle hole. Thankfully, we don't have to worry about that for this motherboard here, so I'm gonna go ahead and screw in the middle one. All right, now our motherboard is installed, so we can go ahead and lift up the case. All right, now that we have our motherboard installed, which we can see a portion of it over here, this will be a great time to connect your PC case cables directly to the motherboard before we start filling this up with a lot of chaos. So first things first, let's go ahead and unleash these cables. All right, so this case has a total of 6 separate connectors. You're gonna have your standard front panel connector, your HD audio, and you have 2 separate USB connectors. The thicker one here controls the USB A's, and the smaller one here controls the USB-C on the front. And finally, these 2 last connectors that are all the way on top here, this one over here is a adjustable RGB header, which basically controls the RGB elements of this case. And then this final 2-pin connector here, first time I've ever seen this connector, but I believe this goes directly to a specific hub, but we don't have that type of hub here, so we can completely ignore this cable. The ones that we are going to focus on here are going to be these 5 cables. This case has a lot of built-in loops here, so you can attach Velcro straps or zip ties so you can cable manage easier. All right, so I just added 2 Velcro straps there, and we're going to our front panel connector. We want to position it in this left hole here because it is located on this side of the motherboard, and then the HD audio on the right side looking from the back, so you can feed it on this second bottom right hole. All right, for the HD audio, I had the cable originally like this, but completely forgot that the PSU is going to be located right on top. So instead, go ahead and loop it under this little tunnel, and then go ahead and push it through over here. That way, when we put the PSU on top, it'll lay perfectly flat. And since these 2 are USB connectors, I can go ahead and pass them through on this grommet over here. Depending on your motherboard and the positioning of the USBs, you may use the bottom grommet as well, but I'm going to pass it over here. Just in case some of you guys are not going to be using fans that have separate RGB headers, I'm going to go ahead and position this on the top here so I can cater to those that might use a different style fan that comes with their own type of hubs. So with that being said, let's go ahead and flip this all over. All right, now we're back on the front, and we should have all of our cables inside the case. And I always recommend referencing your motherboard's manual so that way you can see the layout of your specific motherboard. Starting off with the top right, this is going to be again the adjustable RGB that's responsible for controlling the RGB elements of this case, because it does have RGB such as the logo. Just in case you're going to be using a different set of fans, this cable over here would connect to an adjustable RGB header, which looks just like this. You can see that right there. It has 3 pins. Just pay attention to the pins and match it up. Next cable that we're going to tackle is going to be this USB connector here. Now this controls the USB Type-C on the front of the case. Most modern motherboards now will include this connector. Some older generation motherboards, you may not have this specific connector. In that case, you can ignore this cable and push it to the back. But for those that are on current generation motherboards, then you want to locate the USB connector, which on this board is right over here. So it only goes one way, so if it doesn't go the first time, just go ahead and flip it over. But once you have it in, go ahead and push it all the way in. You should hear some nice little clicks. You can start tucking the cable inside. Next, we're gonna attack the other USB connector here, and these are for the USB A's on the case. You should definitely have these. So this motherboard has a total of 2 of those, but we only need 1 of them, so I can decide on whichever way to connect this, whether it be on the bottom or the top. And before you connect it, just make sure you pay attention to this little notch over here. It should match up with the notch. It only goes one way. Go ahead and push it in, and then you can start tucking these cables inside. All right, now we're ready to connect these 2 bottom connectors. On this side, we should have the front panel connector, which on almost every motherboard should be on the bottom right. And this has a total of 9 pins with 1 missing. So make sure you align that missing pin. And once you match up the pins, go ahead and push the cable all the way in. And then you can start tucking the cable in. Now we have the front panel connector in. And then on the bottom left, we should have the HD audio. Same thing, this has a total of 9 pins with a missing pin. Push it all the way through. All right, to give you guys a close-up, once again, we have the front panel connector. You have the HD audio. And looking more on the right side, we have both USBs connected. And finally on the top right, we have our adjustable RGB. All right, and this is how the back should look like. And once again, I'm using Velcro straps, so that way I can cable manage as much as possible. So with that out of the way, we can go ahead and install some fans. Before we set up any fans, I want to go over the TUF Gaming TR120 fans. So these TR120s come in either white or black, and they also come in either your standard blade or reverse blade configuration. This is great, so that way we can see actual design of the fan versus flipping them over to achieve an intake, for example. So when you're doing a 10 fan setup, in this case, you want 6 reverse blades and 4 standard. They come in a 3-pack in either the reverse or the standard blade. And then you can get a single pack of the standard blade. And the reason why I recommend doing a 3-pack versus buy them individually is because the 3-pack is going to include this PWM 3-way splitter here, so that way you can chain 3 fans to share one 4-pin PWM connector, which basically powers these fans and sends the RPM signals. So since these fans are PWM fans, what that means is that they have 4-pin connector, and these also come in adjustable RGB, so a separate Y splitter. So these are very thick case fans. They're 28 millimeters, so a lot larger than your standard fans. A lot of standard fans are usually around 25 millimeters, and that extra 3 millimeters makes a huge difference in terms of fitments and even the possibility of screwing this to an AIO radiator. So just to show you an example here, this is an ROG fan that's found on the LC3 360 AIO, and the radiator screws that you use to screw these fans into that AIO has the perfect length to screw in these type of fans. However, if I'm using the LC3 and want to use the TR120 fans, once I put the screw in, you're gonna notice that there's not enough thread, there's not enough length on these screws, because these screws are meant to accommodate the thickness of this fan. Now, if you're gonna go for the Ryujin 3 Extreme, they have 30 millimeter fans, so even thicker than these, so the screws will have enough thread to screw them in. But what if you want to use the LC3 or any other AIO that might have a thinner fan case? Well, you can pick up some screws online, which I'll also link, but generally for these screws, you want the number 632 UNC screws, and the length of it, try to get them to be about 34-35 millimeters in length. And when you look at both of these, you can tell that the one that I just got is definitely longer. And when I pass it through the TR120s, I now have enough thread or enough length to screw it into pretty much any AIO. So really important to pick some of these up if you want to use the TR120s. So besides the fitment, another great feature of these TR120s is that they feature a double layer LED array. And that means that they have additional RGB LED strips on the sides of these fans. And what's great about this is that you can be very personal. So for example, taking a set of 3 reverse blades, if we flip them over, depending on how you position these fans, you can rotate the fan to give you different patterns. And this gives you a nice opportunity to maybe differentiate it a little bit. And if you want to take a look at how that would kind of look, you can see on the back here, there's flexible pattern sets. So depending on how you want to customize the orientation of your specific fans. That choice is completely up to you. Now you're ready to attach some fans. I'm gonna first start off with the bottom fans, which will be using the TUF TR120 reverse blade fans, because these are going to be intaking cold air. Now this case has a removable bottom fan bracket, which takes a total of 2 screws. So you just have to unscrew them, and then you're able to just lift this up and pull this whole bracket away so we can attach our fans. Make sure you take a look at the bottom bracket, and we want to make sure that the wires are facing this way so we can easily feed it inside of the case. So once we know that, go ahead and play around with the positioning of the fans. So I'm personally going to position them like this, so that way I have one single RGB on the middle, and then the other 2 are going to have more like a quad line. Once you have the perfect position, go ahead and grab these all together. You can place them on top, and then next we're going to grab the bracket and the fans together, and we're just going to flip them just so that we know we have the perfect orientation. And next you want to position the brackets so that all screw holes are exposed. And the 3-pack includes 12 case fan screws in black, and you just take a Phillips screw and you screw all 12 screws in. All right, now I have all 12 screws installed. We can take a look how it looks like on the other side. And once you screw them in, some of these corners might have some little bit of shavings here that you can just clear out with your finger real quick. But as you can see, this is the pattern that I'm going to go for. Now before putting it in our case, the first thing I want to do, since we have the 3-pack and it comes with this 3-way PWM splitter, I'm going to connect this first. All I'm going to do here is on each of these fans, I'm going to grab the 4-pin PWM connectors here. Starting from the left side, we're just going to connect it right in. Pay attention to this tab. It's going to line up to this tab over here, and we're going to connect the first one. I'm going to grab the next one here, the middle fan. And then the last one, which is the 3rd fan, we're going to connect that right here. So now all these 3 fans share one 4-pin power connector here. Now to connect the addressable RGB, let's go ahead and loosen everything up here. All right, so each set of fans, this being the middle one, this being a left one, has a female addressable RGB connector, and it also has a male connector that's covered. And we're going to connect the male and the female ends together. Now these 2 fans are not connected to each other to share the same addressable RGB signals. And now we're going to reveal the male side again, and we're going to grab our 3rd fan, and we're going to do the same thing. So now all 3 fans are linked up via RGB, and you'll notice that on each of the ends we have one additional male end, so I can still connect this to other devices as well that share an addressable RGB. And on the left we have the female, so this could go to the case, for example, or I can continue linking up multiple devices. Let's go ahead and put it on the case. All right, now we're ready to attach the bottom fan bracket. It's going to be a lot of wires that we're going to have to pass through. So my recommendation is you want all of these wires to be passed through on this opening over here. So go ahead and start feeding these cable through this little hole, and go ahead, and since the back is still open, you can kind of reach for the cables and start pulling them in. All right, now that we have most of these wires in, you can go ahead and start positioning the bracket. Now keep in mind that the TR120s, they're very thick, which could touch the front panel connector a little bit, the wires and the HD audio, so just pay attention to that. All right, so once you get about here, you can go ahead and start lifting the front panel connector a little bit higher. I would probably route this cable more to the right side so that it could tuck underneath very well. And same thing for the HD audio, you may have to lift this up a little bit. Once you find the bracket mounting holes, you can go ahead and drop this in, and then we can screw the bracket in place with the same 2 screws we just removed. With the bottom fans installed, the back is going to look crazy. All right, and here is how the back is looking. We have all of these wires that we just connected, and for now I am going to tuck them underneath this tunnel for now. And I know that all of these cables are for our bottom fans, and we'll connect these later on, and then I can show you guys where each one can go. All right, next we're gonna install our side fans. Now this bracket over here is not removable, so we will have to attach the fans on the actual case itself. So go ahead and rotate the case all around. All right, so when grabbing your TR120, make sure it's of course reverse blade, and since we're behind the case, we're gonna have them installed with the back of the fan facing us, looking at the back case. Go ahead and undo the wires. We're gonna go ahead and pass it through, making sure the cables are also there as well. Then we're gonna take both of these cables and we're gonna pass it through the grommet and go ahead and pull them. And once we're here, you definitely want to have a screwdriver ready with a case screw. And we want to position it at the highest point possible. So you'll see this over here. This is the highest that we can go, being able to screw all 4 screw ins. If I go any higher, I won't be able to screw this corner over here. So I just want to put it in the highest position. And we want to make it as straight as possible. So let's go ahead and just screw them in. As long as you have at least 1 screw, you can let go of the fan and position the second screw. And I recommend going to the opposite corner and making sure that you straighten everything up. All right, now this one, I kind of switched the side so that way we can change the LED pattern so it can have a different effect. But if you want them all to match up, then again, pay attention to the patterns and then you can have them all match up. All right, second fan is in. And for your last one, you definitely want to start from the other side. All right, and this one I'm matching the top one as well. So that way these two have the same pattern and this one has a different pattern. All right, I got all 3 fans in, and we should have each of these cables coming out of each TR120 fan. And so while we're back here, we can start connecting these cables all together. Just so go ahead and grab your 3-way splitter. And we want to have the end of this cable on the downward position because most of the system chassis fans are located on the bottom of the motherboard. So to accommodate that, we want to start off with the top one to be the top fan. Then the middle one is going to be the middle. And then the final one is going to be right over here. And doing it this way, now the cable can be easier fed to the bottom. Same thing, we're going to do the same thing with the adjustable RGBs. They're going to be located on the bottom as well. So I'm going to join them together, starting with the top to the middle. Go ahead and unlock this. All right, top and middle are connected. Grab this end and the bottom RGB. And we're gonna connect that. So now all 3 fans are connected all together. For now, I'm just going to zip tied or Velcro strapped, just so that we can have it out of the way. And we're gonna tackle these later on. So for now, just leave all these cables kind of down like this, and we'll connect everything when it's time to connect. All right, this is exactly how the side fans are gonna look. Now when it comes to the rear fan, we wanna make sure we grab the standard blade fan because this is gonna be exhausting hotter out. And before placing this fan, you wanna decide on whether you want a single line of RGB or if you want this nice little quad pattern. I think I'm gonna go for the quad pattern, so I'm gonna have the cables positioned upward. That way it'll show this pattern. So once you know that, go ahead and feed this cable in that top left grommet. Go ahead and grab your hand on the other side so you can pull the cable. And now we can start positioning the fan. Carefully place the fan on top of here and it should stay in place. So go ahead and grab your case screw fan and you want to position your fan to whatever height that you want. Maybe I want to position it like this, where it kind of matches the downward slope of this motherboard, or I can go as high as here, depending on whichever one you want to go. But I think I'm gonna go for this, and you can always readjust it later on. And then the case screw goes right in the back, which I'll show you in a second. All right, and this is exactly how the back looks. So we just have to screw in the 4 case screw fans. All right, we have all 4 screws in, and I'm gonna go ahead and rotate this again, because now I want to pay attention to this little top corner over here, and I want to manage it as much as possible. So go ahead and grab the wire as high up as possible, and there's this little groove on the case where you can kind of push the cable inside. That's exactly how I set it up here. That's just to clean up the wire as much as possible. And this is how the rear of the fan looks. Now, because of the thickness of the fan and the positioning of the motherboard, it does cover up a little bit of the ROG logo on this motherboard that does light up RGB as well, but those are just basically thick problems. Now that we have all these fans installed, the next step that we're going to tackle is going to be our AIO, which we're going to be top mounting it on top. Now, depending on which AIO you want to choose, I'll be covering both the Ryujin 360 and the LC3 so you can get a good idea of how each of these will look. Whether you decide to do a top mounted AIO or simply just the fans, what's great about this case is that this top bracket is removable. There are just 2 screws that are holding it in place, and with those 2 screws out, you can lift up the bracket and to the right, and it should come out very easily, so we can attach our AIO on this bracket so we can easily put it back in. And then it's up to you if you want to use the original 3 ROG themed fans. They can go right on top just like this, and you can just screw them in. However, we're going to be using the TR120s, and just keep in mind that the screws that come in the LC3 can only accommodate these ROG fans because they have the proper length for these specific fans. They're not going to fit, like I showed you earlier. They're not going to fit on the TR120s, so instead you're going to need to pick up separate screws, and these are the specification of these screws. Number 632 UNC screws, 34 millimeters in thread length, so anything between that 35 millimeters should be perfectly fine. If you're going to be using the Ryujin AIO instead, since those have 30 millimeter fans, then the screws on that one will be long enough. So since we're going to be using the TR120s, we're going to be using these aftermarket screws that give us the proper length. So this is the pattern that I'm going to go for, mirroring exactly what I have on the bottom fans, and we're just going to place this right on top. And also you want these wires to be on the fronts or on the top, so that way when we're installing it, all of the cables are behind the radiator, so that way we're not seeing those cables in front of the case, of course. So now once you have that proper orientation and you have the pattern that you want, go ahead and use these number 632 34 millimeter screws and screw each one in. It's going to be a total of 12. All right, we have all 12 screws screwed in, so everything is nice and locked. All right, now we're ready to set up the Ryujin 360 Extreme. Make sure you remove this plastic protector here on both sides of the radiator. Now, what's really great about this Ryujin 360 Extreme is that the fans that come with this have amazing specs, and they also feature a magnetic daisy chain. So all I gotta do is just position them close together, and you can see they magnetically snap together. Then we take the third fan here, then we can magnetically snap them in place, and now we have all 3 fans connected together. And all we have to do here is position the fans right on top. And just to show you here that these screws over here are long enough to support the thickness of the TR120. You see, as soon as I put this through, I have enough length to screw this in. So if you want to use the TR120s, you definitely can. So go ahead and take your screws and screw all of them in. All right, here are all the 12 screws installed. And as you can see, these fans are very thick. I even think they're even thicker than the actual radiator itself. Well, they could probably be the same size. But now we're going to install the top bracket here. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip this over. And depending on how you want to position the tubes, it's completely up to you. I like my tubes to be on the right side over here, but you might want the tubes to be on the other side, and that's completely up to you guys. So, and then to make it as easy as possible, if you're installing this on a table, it might be easier to have the tubes kind of like floating underneath, so that way you can comfortably attach the top bracket. And once you have it nicely positioned, you can go ahead and screw all 12 screws in using these screws that are also found in the box. All right, now we have all the screws installed on the top bracket, and finally we're just going to connect the fan connector. And ASUS does give you both of these cables. They give you both the female and the male end. So since we have a female over here, I just need to locate the male end. So same thing here, it's magnetically attachable, but just keep in mind of this little opening over here. Match that up with this tab here. So it should go in just like this, and voila, everything is nice and magnetic. Now we're ready to put this on top of our case. All right, so go ahead and grab the top frame with your AIO attached, and just pay attention to this cable over here. And what we're gonna do is we're going to start dropping the pump inside the middle first, along with the cable. Just be very gentle, of course. And right about here, I want to take this cable and start feeding it through this left grommet here. As much as we can. We could always pull it later on, not a big deal. Right after that, go ahead and position this pump a little bit more towards the left. And what we're going to do is we're going to angle the top bracket making sure that these pieces go inside of these little 3 slots. Right now I have it in an angle, and now I should be able to drop it in nice and smooth, just like that. And then of course we have the 2 screws right on top, which is what we removed earlier. That locks the bracket in place. All right, so go ahead and lay your case flat. Just keep in mind of your AIO pump. Try to position it as close to the motherboard as possible so that as you're lowering it down, it's not gonna cause too much problems. All right, now you're ready to install the pump. Since we're using an AMD processor, this is the bracket that we're gonna be using. I'm gonna place that right on top of the motherboard. So to install this, we gotta first remove the original brackets here. It's gonna take a Phillips head screwdriver. We are gonna reuse the screws though to screw in the AMD bracket. All right, all 4 screws are out, so I'm gonna place it gently on top of the motherboard. And now we can remove these 2 plastic pieces. Go ahead and put it to the side. And then for this bracket here, pay attention to this little arrow. Let's say CPU, and it is pointing to the actual direction of the CPU. So this is gonna be the top piece, so I'm gonna flip it over so that it is pointing to the CPU. You place these right on top of the original screw hole points that we just removed. And then using the same screws, we're going to now screw them in place. Now we have the AMD bracket installed. I will say that the Ryujin bracket is so much easier to install versus the one that comes in an LC. All right, next up here, we're going to remove the top cover. Revealing the embedded VRM fan. And the reason why I want to remove that is so that way we can screw in the screws directly to the AMD bracket. Next step is to remove this plastic shield, which comes with pre-installed thermal paste, which is really nice and convenient. And next we're going to line it up with these top screw points. Just line it up. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to screw them in. Now we have the pump screwed in very nicely. The next thing here is to unleash these cables. Before we put the cover on, I'm going to move this cable underneath. All right, next thing is to place the LCD screen right on top. All right, next thing here is to connect our AIO. Now we're going to have 2 separate connectors. One of them is going to be a 4-pin AIO pump header, which is responsible for controlling the actual pump itself. And this one here is an internal USB header, which is directly responsible for the LCD screen. So the internal USB, we want to pass it over this grommet over here. And we'll be connecting this later on the bottom of the case. And finally, we have the AIO pump header right on the right side of the motherboard here. And make sure you pay attention to the tab. And we're just going to go ahead and connect that in. All right, AIO pump header is installed. And next thing we're going to do is we're just going to clean this up a little bit. All right, clean that up as nice as I could. Next, we're going to lift up the case. All right, this is how we're looking so far. We have the Ryujin Extreme perfectly installed with that massive 3.5-inch LCD display. We want to make sure we grab our AMD bracket, which we're going to replace with the one that's in there. We're also going to need the AMD standoffs. And we're also going to need these little thumb screws as well. Once you have those accessories in, we just have to remove these original plastic pieces here. Total 4 screws. All right, with those 4 screws out of the way, we can go ahead and take off the original plastic pieces here and put them to the side. Make sure you save them just in case. Then we're going to grab our AMD standoffs here, and we want to pay attention to these 2 pieces here. So this is going to be the standoff that's going to be screwed in, and you want the thicker side to go inside the screw mounting holes. And then for this one, we have 2 different orientations depending on if you're using AM5 or AM4. If you're on AM5 like I am, so this is any Ryzen 7000, 8000, or 9000, you want to make sure you have these lines on top. And then for older AMD CPUs in the AM4 platform, you would rotate it like this. So they would place like this for AM4. AM5 is going to be like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to place these right on top. Now that we have those 4 in, we can go ahead and screw in the standoffs. All right, now we have all the standoffs successfully installed. Next thing we're going to do is going to grab the AMD plate. It's not going to fit this one, of course. So now what we're going to do is we can remove this plastic piece. And then, let me lay this back down. I'm going to rotate this to the left. And this whole piece should come off. And we're going to replace that. Go ahead and place that in. And then turn it to the right. And now that's locked into place. Place the AIO right on top. And I'm just gonna leave that on top for there for a second. We're gonna grab the thumb screws. We have a total of 4. Might be easier just grabbing it with your thumb. And go ahead and start tightening it. You don't have to over tighten it yet. The first thing here I'm gonna do is I'm gonna screw each one of these thumb screws in just halfway. All right, once you have all the thumb screws in, go ahead and screw each side in. All right, now the pump is installed perfectly. We can start moving these tubes out of the way. And next we're going to unlock these cables. So the LC3 has 2 cables. We have 1 internal USB, and we also have a 4-pin pump header connector. So for the USB, since it's gonna get connected directly to the motherboard, what I'm gonna do here is I'm going to pass this cable underneath, right all over here, and we'll connect that later on. Finally, we have the 4-pin AIO pump. This XA70A has a dedicated AIO pump all the way on the right side, and all of these are covered at the moment, so we're gonna remove the cover for the AIO pump. That's going to reveal the 4-pin AIO pump. So to connect it, just pay attention to the tab here and line up the tabs on the AIO pump header. And go ahead and try to manage it and then tuck the excess underneath. That way it could look as clean as possible. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to connect all of our fans to our motherboard. All right, before installing the PSU, we're now ready to connect all of our PWM and ARGB fans. Now, depending on which AIO you're going to go for, I'm going to show you guys exactly how to connect each one of these sets. So what we have already installed, we have the side fans. So all of these cables here are for your side fans. On the bottom over here are, of course, your bottom 3 fans. And then over here, you should have a cable for your rear fan. Now, depending on if you're going to use the Ryujin Extreme has just this simple cable that's already shooting this way. And if you're going to use the TR120 fans, then you'll have these cables instead pass through these grommets over here. So the XA70-A has 3 adjustable RGB headers, and we already have the adjustable RGB of the case already connected to the top left. Now, because the Ryujin has this portion of the ARGB, I'm going to connect the RGBs together with the rear fans. Whereas if you're going to go for the TR120s, then you can go ahead and remove the case RGB, connect them together so that they all share the same RGB. And that's completely up to you how you want to do that. So let's first connect the RGB. So once again, I have the Ryujin over here. We have a female adjustable RGB and a female PWM, whereas the rear TR120 has a Y splitter for the adjustable RGB. So I'm going to unlock this male end, and I'm just going to connect these two. So now my rear fan and the top 3 fans on top of the AIO are sharing the same RGB link. And here I have the female end, so I can easily connect this to the motherboard. Now, you also have the option of chaining the adjustable RGB on all of these if you want to share one adjustable RGB, or because we have 3, I don't mind just separating the 2. So now we have the rear and top fans connected. And then for these, the side and the bottom, we want to locate the set of the adjustable RGB of the bottom, and we want to locate the RGBs from the side fans. All right, and since I want to chain the RGBs from the bottom and the side fans, from the bottom, I'm just going to take a male end. So I'm just going to unlock this one, take the female end of the side fans, and I'm going to connect them together. So now the side and the bottom share the same RGB signals. And now we should be left with 2 RGB female ends. And this RGB female end for the case is already connected. Now it's completely up to you how you want to chain these. If again, I can chain them all together if I wanted to as well, but I have 3, so I'll just utilize those. Now that we have all the RGB connected, the next thing to do is to connect all of the PWM fan headers. Now in this case, I'm going to connect them all on the bottom because we do have a lot of fan headers in the bottom of this motherboard. Both the female ends of the PWM and the 1 female end of the adjustable RGB, and we're going to tuck that right underneath this little hole over here. And I'm just going to use my opposite hand so I can grab these. So that's on the other side. And then for the bottom and side fans, we should have 2 separate PWM connectors and 1 shared adjustable RGB. And we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to pass the female ends on the bottom. But keep in mind that the addressable RGB is more located on the right side. So just for the RGB portion, I'm gonna go underneath this tunnel and pass that right underneath. And then for the PWM, we're going to also pass that, but we can start tucking all these cables underneath this tunnel here because they're all connected already. If you want to use Velcro straps to contain them, you definitely can. And we're going to pass the two PWMs right underneath. And finally, we have this internal USB connector that controls the LCD of our Ryujin Extreme. We're also going to pass that right underneath this one over here. And I did add some Velcro straps around so I can easily route these cables. So you can use zip ties, you can use Velcro straps, whatever you want to use. All right, next we're going to rotate the case. And we should have all of the connectors located on the bottom. Starting from the right side, we have the female PWM connectors, and these control both the bottom and the side fan. And they're going to be connected to these 4-pin fan headers. And on the motherboard manual, you'll be able to detect each one of them, but we have a total of 5 fan headers on the bottom, which is perfect. So we're going to take each one of the female end and we're just going to connect it to the fan header. Just pay attention to the tab as well. All right, and as you can see, I have both fan headers attached. Again, this is for the bottom fan and the side fan. Next thing, we have the internal USB header, and that's going to be connected to either one of these USB headers. Most motherboards have 2. Make sure you match the missing pin. Internal USB connected, and we can start pulling this cable in. Next, we have the addressable RGB headers, and those get connected to these little headers over here. So we just have to match the 3 pins. All right, and that's responsible for controlling the RGB of all the fans, including the top, bottom, rear. So that's already connected. And next, finally, we have the last 2 PWM connectors. All right, here's all the connectors that we have connected so far. Of course, we have the front panel connectors. We have 2 PWMs connecting the bottom and the side fans, internal USB hub for the LCD screen, another PWM for the rear fan, 2 addressable RGBs controlling all of the RGBs of each of these fans. Can go ahead and start tucking some of these cables in. And then the last PWM for the top fans. And then we also have the HD audio here. And as you can see here, with the TR120s, I completely replaced the original Ryujin fans with the TR120s. And then for the connectors here, all we have to do is remove the adjustable RGB from the case and connect it with the TR120s and connect one end of the female end on the motherboard. And over here is where we put the additional 3-way splitter of the PWM. And I have that connected to CPU fan, but that way we know that these top 3 fans are connected to the CPU fan header. Now we're ready to install our PSU on our case. We'll be using the TUF Gaming 1000 watt gold rated PSU, which is a beautiful looking white PSU. So all we have to do here is position the PSU on top of this over here. You'll notice a little rubber piece as well that's protecting it. And so go ahead and position that. Make sure that these cables are tucked behind the PSU as well. Push it in. And finally, you can go ahead and screw in 4 screws. You're going to be using these PSU screws found in the box of your PSU or in the accessory kit of the case. All right, all 4 screws are in. And now we'll see the back. You can see the PSU is nicely installed, and we can go ahead and tuck all of the chaos right underneath. That way it's not so messy. Next, we're going to start connecting some PSU cables, but first I'm going to go over each of these cables. And starting off with the easiest cable to identify is going to be your 24-pin motherboard connector. Next is going to be your CPU 8-pin connectors, and they are labeled so you know which one goes to the CPU and which one goes to the PSU. So make sure you follow those directions. Next major cable, especially on ATX 3.0 and above PSUs, are going to be your 12-volt high power cables. Now these cables are used for the latest generation NVIDIA cards. So this is perfect for, again, for 40 series and 50 series that utilize that new connector. Now, if you have a GPU that does not use that new 12-volt high power connector, then you also get a set of PCIe connectors. Now, starting off with this one actually has the 12-volt high power connector that you can actually connect to the PSU, and this breaks up into 2 separate PCIe connectors. So this is perfect for graphics cards that call for 2 of these, so you can use just 1 cable. And then you also get 2 separate PCIe connectors. Now, if for whatever reason your GPU calls for 3, then you can use one of this that comes with 2 and 1 additional single PCIe connector for a total of 3, for example. Or maybe you have 4, then you can use all 4 separate PCIe connectors. Next set of cables here are going to be your SATA power connectors, and these are used to power USB hubs, certain AIOs that need additional power. And finally, we have your Molex connectors. These are very older style connectors that I personally have never used before, but if you need these, then it comes included. So if you're following this build, all you need is a 24-pin connector, 2 CPU cables, and one 12-volt high power cable. All we need are these cables. Now that we know which PSU cables we're going to be using, the first thing I want to do here is connect both the CPU and the motherboard 24-pin connectors first. And this step is going to look completely different depending on if you're going to be using Strimer cables like I am over here. And keep in mind that they also have CPU Strimer cables, but since the opening of the top grommet is very tight, I don't recommend putting this one because you're really not going to see any of the RGB cables. So I'll definitely link them, but I don't think it's necessary at all. So we're going to be focusing on the CPU and the motherboard connectors. Keep in mind that since these fans are very thick, we don't have a lot of space to connect the CPU connector. So my recommendation first is to loosen up the 2 screws on top, lift up the bracket, place it on top of the case. So I'll show you exactly how that looks like. Make sure you loosen up the 2 screws from the top bracket. Go ahead and lift it up gently. All right, so you can leave it on top like this, and that should give us more space to connect these connectors. Now we're gonna grab 2 CPU connectors. You want to locate the side that says CPU because that's what's going to be connected to the actual motherboard. And then you want to connect this with this tab facing upwards. You should hear a nice little click. Okay, first one is on. All right, second one is on. And now we're going to grab these 2 cables. We're going to pass these on top grommet. So go ahead and lift this up just a little bit. Take the top left. Go ahead and pass it through. And then use the other hand to assist you in pulling this cable through. Now that we have the cable through, we can go ahead and place the AIO back into place. Make sure you screw in the 2 AIO screws for the top bracket. Alright, so our CPU is in. Next, we're going to work on a motherboard cable. And once again, I'll be using the Strimer cables. This step is going to look different depending on what you're going to do. But if you're going to use the PSU cable, just go ahead and connect it with the top end like this. Just like that. And then you can take the other end, which has like a little split. And then you can start feeding it in that right grommet. However, since we're going to be using the wireless Strimer instead, now these are just simply extension cables, which will then connect to this one again. So if you have the wireless Strimer like I have here, this is the part that's going to go on the motherboard itself. Now these come pre-installed with a black clip. If you want to change it for the white clip, they also include it in the box and you can easily swap them out very easily. So with the Strimer cable, we're just going to connect it the same way we did with the motherboard. Make sure you connect it all the way through. Then we're going to take the Strimer and we're going to pass it through this little grommet right over here. So we can just bend the cable and pass it through. All right, just like that, we have the motherboard and the CPU connected. So let's go ahead and rotate the case. All right, now we're in the back of the case and we should have our CPU cables hanging out. And whether you have the original PSU cables or the Strimer, it should look just like this. Now what I'm going to do first is I'm going to connect the PSU motherboard connector to the Strimer. And so you should have both of these ends here, 2 CPU connectors and the motherboard connector as well. Since I have Velcro strap, I'm going to route them so they can be nice and tidied. Since I'm using the Strimer for the motherboard, there's a lot of cable that I don't need all this length. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the TUF Gaming Velcro strap that's included, just so I can reduce the length and contain it even more. And I'm going to Velcro it right over here. All right, and I'm just going to leave the bulk of the cable on top of the PSU, just so I can maneuver the wireless Strimers whenever I have to. That way it's not super tight. And now we can quickly connect the motherboard and the CPU connectors. They're going to be located right over here. They are labeled CPU/PCIe, so I can go ahead and connect these on either one. It's connected right over here. Make sure you connect it all the way through. All right, CPU power is connected. Next we're gonna do is the motherboard, and that's gonna be located right over here. This one be connected all the way to the bottom. Now we have motherboard and the CPU connected. All right, and the last connector is gonna be your 12-volt high power cable or your PCIe connectors if you're using a GPU that doesn't have the 12-volt high power connector. And once again, I'll be using the Lian wireless Strimer extension cables. Since I don't need all of this length, I'm just gonna shorten it with the included TUF Gaming Velcro strap. So that shortens the cables just enough. And the next thing you want to do is you want to locate the section that says PSU, and you're going to connect that right on top, right over here. Make sure you connect this all the way through as tight as possible. And if you're not going to be using the Strimer, you can go ahead and feed this cable through the grommet if you want to, but I'll be using Strimer, so I don't really need to do that. So instead, I am going to use this Velcro over here. And for now, since I'm using the Strimer, for now I'm just going to tuck this down and we'll connect our GPU right after. Now the wireless Strimer cables uses this L wireless connector, and there's two ways to connect this. You have a standard USB that could be connected to the back of your motherboard or on the front of the case, or you can use this cable that connects to the controller and splits off into an internal USB and a 4-pin PWM connector. Now these are specifically for Lian fans, so we don't really need to connect this. We would need to connect this if you want to have this inside the case like I do. This is really large and it does stick out a lot, so I personally prefer to have this controller inside the case. So to do that as simple as possible, we're only going to be connecting the internal USB header. So we have one more, which is right over here. So we have a total of 2 internal USBs. And then route the excess cables underneath the case. Let's go ahead and flip the case again. And once again, if you're going to connect the USB, then you don't have to do this step. Connect this connector to the back of the USB. And I got one more TUF Gaming Velcro strap. Why not? So I'm going to tuck the excess cable underneath the PSU. And then we could just leave the L Connect controller right inside the case. This is what I personally prefer to do. Or you can again skip this step and you can just plug it right on the USB behind the case if you wanted to. Now next thing here is installing our graphics card. There's 2 ways to install our GPUs. You can go for the standard horizontal method, or you can vertically mount your GPU using a vertical GPU mount like this Cooler Master V3. I'll be showing you guys both ways, and the GPU of choice that we're going to do for this step is going to be the ROG STRIX 4090. This is a very special card to me. Had this card for almost 2 years now, and looking back, this was $2,200, and in today's prices that looks like a bargain now. This was like one of the best white GPUs of all time. I'll also be showcasing you how a smaller GPU would look as well. So if you're going to horizontally mount your GPU or vertically mount it, you are going to have to remove some of these PCIe slot covers over here. Now this case actually has a lot. It has a total of 9 PCIe slot, which is crazy. And in order to reveal the screw points easier, there is on the side of the case some thumb screws here that you can loosen up with a screwdriver, of course. They don't go all the way out, just enough where they're out. So this is like a little door here, which is pretty cool, and that's going to reveal all the screw points, so you can easily remove these PCIe slot covers. And this whole door comes off too if you want to remove it, but I'm just going to keep it on for now. And next we want to figure out exactly how many PCIe slot covers we're going to take. And so in this case, as you can see here, I'll only have to remove the 2nd and the 3rd slots. So taking a Phillips screwdriver, we're going to remove the 2nd and 3rd. So we got 2 out. Hold on to these 2 screws because we are going to use it to screw our GPU in. You want to pay attention to the connectors over here. There is a notch here that you're going to match up exactly to the notch of this PCIe slot. And then you're going to gently position it. Once you have it close is when you can start pushing it in. Okay, just like that, we have a nice secured connection. And then using the same screws we just removed, you can go ahead and screw them in place. All right, we have that screwed in, and then you can screw the slot cover thing. Now that our GPU is in, depending on the weight of your GPU, you're gonna notice some type of sagging here. So this is a very heavy GPU. So to fix that, we can use an anti-sag bracket. And the good thing about the case is that it includes an anti-sag bracket that has a really strong magnet on the bottom, so it can you can place this on the bottom of the case, for example, lift up the graphics card a little bit, and you'll notice that I don't have enough space for this. So they also give us this one over here as well, the shorter one. But great thing about ASUS is that they give us these type of anti-sag brackets, which are really convenient because they're also magnetic, and I can just loosen this up, lift this up, and kind of like see exactly where does it need the actual space here. So there's a lot of ways you can position the anti-sag bracket, but thankfully this meets in the middle of this RGB strips. You are able to place this more on the inside if you so choose to. You could also probably tuck it in all the way to the back here as well. Just pay attention to the fans, but that's one way to ensure that your GPU is leveled depending on how heavy your graphics card is. Now if I were to use this 4070 Ti Super, it's much lighter, so there's a good chance that I don't even need to use an anti-sag bracket at all. So just keep that in mind. But since we are going to be vertically mounting the GPU instead, we're going to take this off completely, and I'm going to show you exactly how to install a vertical GPU mount. So let's go ahead and take this off first. You want to go ahead, of course, unscrew the 2 screws holding the GPU. And if you ever want to remove the GPU from your motherboard, depending on which motherboard you have, you may have a specific button that you can click to pull out, reference your manual. But in the case of the new Strix X870-A, all I have to do is grab the left portion of the GPU, and make sure you be as gentle as possible. Since this is a large graphics card and heavy, go ahead and use both hands to support it, but you want to pull it from the left side. So this left hand is going to be pulling it from the left side. I'm going to gently pull it out, and that's pretty much it. Now we're ready to install this vertical GPU mount. Now the GT502 Ryzen comes with a kit to vertically mount your GPU. However, you are going to need to purchase a separate riser cable, so I would probably recommend just getting yourself a vertical GPU mount separately, because that way it's a lot easier to mount your GPUs. And the position that I want to do it in is I want to be in the middle, so I'll be removing these 3, and I can leave the bottom one intact. All right, perfect. We're ready to install our vertical mounts. Now keep in mind that once you get this vertical mount, this riser cable is going to be separately, so make sure you install this first. It just takes 2 screws, very easy to install. Once you have that installed, connect this slot over here. Go ahead and push that in. All right, so we have the riser cable installed, and now we want to be very gentle, because keep in mind that this case has the slot covers more on the left, so I do have to bring the vertical mount inside before I'm able to push it to the left, as you can see here. And next thing, you want to go ahead and push the vertical mounts towards the empty slot covers that you just removed, and go ahead and push that in. All right, so it should look something like this, where on the back here you'll notice these little metal pins here. They should be on the outside of the case, and you should be able to push it all the way in, and then you'll see the 2 holes for the vertical mounts are exposed, so now we can screw these 2 in. Now that we have these 2 screwed in, we can go ahead and shut this door off and screw them in. Now we're ready to install the graphics card on this vertical mount. Now the great thing about the Cooler Master is that there's a lot of ways that you can maneuver this. You can bring it forward, bring it all the way to the back. There's this little screw here that you can loosen up, and you also have these 2 tabs in the back that you can also loosen up. That way we can position this over here, so that gives us space to install the graphics card. So what I recommend here is go ahead and push it a little bit toward the right, lock it in place, push this tab down, okay, and pay attention to the AIO pump, because that may get in the way. All right, go ahead and connect that in. Next, we're going to take some screws, and we're going to screw in the top of our GPU so it's held in place. And these are the screw holes that I'm referring to, depending on your GPU. Some might take 3 of these, but the Strix only takes 2. Really hard to tell, but let me just move the little cables here. This is where the 12-volt high power connector is going to be. So I'm going to take the opposite end. I'm going to route it right on top of here. And again, it's up to you how you want to route the Strimer cables, but I personally like to route them like this. And keep in mind that this is color coded depending on which PCIe gen you have. This one's color coded. Make sure everything is all the way in. Go ahead and connect that in. All right, and then for the tubes, up to you how you want to leave the tubes. I'm just going to leave them up like this because I don't want the tubes to be behind the GPU, because it's going to push the GPU forward, and I want to avoid that as much as possible. So I'm going to do it this way. All right, so depending on the size of your card and how much it weighs, it may or may not sag. In this case, we have a very minor sag, and a part of it has to do with the fact that the actual tubes of the Ryujin Extreme is hitting it just a little bit. Now, if you were to use the 4070 Ti Super, since this card is smaller, we won't run into that issue. But if there is any type of sagging, I really highly recommend to straighten it as much as you can. And once again, we do have anti-sag bracket that came with our Strix GPU. So ASUS does give this really nice pillar style, but as you can see, it's a little bit too high. So what I could do is lift this up and position it in the bottom here. Kind of like that. Is kind of have the anti-sag bracket kind of like downward like this, kind of like in between the fans. Or you can get yourself different anti-sag bracket that come in different sizes. This one here is much shorter than the one that comes with the ROG. So I personally would rather have the anti-sag bracket kind of like in the middle, in between here. So make sure you measure it, of course. You want to make sure that you lift it up gently here. So with using this anti-sag bracket, we have more of a leveled GPU. All right, and here is our final connector, the 12-volt high power cable, and this is our Strimer. So all we have to do is connect these two together, making sure that we push it all the way in. That's very important, especially when it comes to this connector. And finally, I want to tighten this up a little bit, so let's see how I want to do this here. All right, and it's up to you how you want to cable manage it. I mean, there's a lot of cables everywhere, as you can see here. All right, so we're almost at the finish line. Everything is connected and we're ready to assemble our case. Now, the last thing that you may or may not want to decide on is how you want the back to finish. Earlier, we removed this bracket on top that gave us the option to install additional fans or even a radiator, which I think is really cool and unique. And so when it's time to put everything back, it's completely up to you. If you do not want to add any type of fans, then you can just simply just slap the back piece and call it a day. Or you can even put the bracket without any fans and it kind of holds everything in place. At that point, it's completely up to you. So here's the actual fan bracket that we removed earlier. You're gonna notice that we have one of the 30mm Ryujin fans. I figured, you know what, these fans are awesome. Why not include it somehow in this build? If I just use one fan, I can go ahead and, you know, pre-place the bracket in. That way, when this fan spins, it's bringing in cold air and it's hitting the back of the motherboard, which I think is pretty cool. Or I could be crazy and just do all three of them. They are magnetic here, so that's pretty awesome. Of course, you definitely want to screw all these case fans in, but just to give you an idea of how it looks like, you can basically have all of these in. Let me just add a screw here real quick. If you wanted to, you could add 3 more fans, whether that's TR120s, whether that's the additional fans that come with your AIO that you want to kind of reuse. It's completely up to you. And remember, I have this connector for the magnetic daisy chain of the Ryujin, so all I have to do is really just connect it and everything is golden. All right, and so with that being said, if you want to attach the magnetic daisy chain fans, then have the connector on the right side, of course, so you can easily connect it. And this works with any type of fan, of course. This being a very thick 30mm fan, I'm surprised that this even fits. So as long as you have everything connected, go ahead and screw all 40 screws. And if you want to use this bracket, you're more than welcome to attach it without fans or just not attach it at all. And make sure that you screw in all of these case fan screws if you decide how to do this. I'm not going to attach it just yet because I want to see how it would look like with all 3 fans, and then I'll just do it with just one fan on this side over here, and we can kind of see how things look. And one thing to know here is that this also even supports 140mm fans, which is crazy. So with that out of the way, one at least good thing about this is that the back looks even better, which is pretty cool. All right, now we're ready to assemble everything together. Let's go ahead and start with the back. Peeling off plastic for these beautiful ROG fans. Next, you're gonna grab the back panel, and you're gonna notice that we have some green tape here. That's just the hold of the filter here. So go ahead and remove that piece of tape. And with that removed, if you ever want to clean out your filters, they're magnetic and you can easily clean that out. Absolutely love that feature. Very easy to remove. Now let's go ahead and attach it. And then go ahead and push it. I gotta say, that's one of my favorite features of this case is the fact that it's so easy to just remove with just a push of a button. Absolutely love that feature. Before we put the front and side glass panel, let's go ahead and peel off all the plastics on the middle of each fan and our AIO, starting with the fans here. Last fan is probably going to be a little tricky. Final plastic for the Ryujin Extreme. Next, we're going to grab the front glass panel here. There is no plastic on the inside, just on the outside. And I'm going to hook it right on the case. Push it in. Just like that, glass was very easy to install. Next, we're going to grab the top piece here. And if you ever want to remove the filter here, it is magnetic as well. You can quickly grab the filter and you can clean it if necessary and reattach it, which is really nice. Top piece went up very smooth. And next we have our side glass here. Only plastic we have is on the front of it. We have some hooks on the bottom. Line that up. And we can close that right in. Absolutely beautiful. And I really love the fact that you have this quick button here that you can easily remove it without having to use any type of thumb screws or any screws for that matter. It is a very easy way to put in and take it off, which is awesome. Now the final thing here would be is whether or not you want to reattach these straps on the top. You can definitely leave it like this if you like. However, I do think these straps do add some really nice unique style to it, so I want to add that real quick. Alright, so we are ready to finally power everything up here. Let's get a final walkthrough of this GT502 Ryzen in white. Now, before you power anything up, make sure you, of course, plug in your AC power cord and have an input cable to a monitor. And make sure you have a mouse and a keyboard connected. I'll be using the ROG STRIX gaming keyboard over here, which is an awesome 75% keyboard here. That also has an integrated OLED display, which looks fire. We also have the ROG Heartbeat Ace Mini gaming mouse as well in white. Definitely an awesome combo, and I love the fact that they have a tri-mode connectivity, so they could be either wired, Bluetooth, or these wireless dongles as you see right over here that I have it connected. Now I do have the option as well to use just one receiver here. Once everything is plugged in, I can use Armory Crate to sync devices into one of these receivers, but for now we're going to keep them separate. Now another key thing here that I highly recommend you guys do as well is right over here you're going to notice a BIOS flashback button over here, and this little square over here has BIOS on it, so you can easily load up a BIOS update file and have it on a USB drive, and you can just stick it in here and then click the BIOS flashback. Of course, you do have to power this on first, like have this on an on position. Once you press and hold the BIOS flashback button, this LED will start to flash, and it takes about probably anywhere between 3 to 7 minutes to completely finish. Once that LED is done, your BIOS on the motherboard is completely updated, and you can remove that and you're on the latest update to ensure maximum compatibility just in case. So once you have all of that, let's go ahead and flip this to the on position. And what I love about the ROG motherboards that have RGB lighting is that they do turn on when it's on standby, which is really nice. And you'll notice that the Ryujin screen is also on as well and is on standby. Now this could be turned off if you don't want to have either the Ryujin screen or the motherboard light on all the time when it's on standby. You can definitely change that, but I think that looks so cool. Before I power this on, I'm just gonna knock off all the lights here so we get a better view of all the lighting here. All right, so let's go ahead and fire this up. Button's gonna be located right on top. 3, 2. Absolutely beautiful. We got all the RGBs turned on, including the one on the case. Got everything nice and booted up. I'm reusing my SSD here, so I already have Windows loaded up. All right, everything booted up beautifully over here. Let's take a closer look. I'm really loving those RGB strips on the sides of these TR120s. Now, of course, I didn't want to forget about these 3 triple fans on the back to see how it looks. Once again, we have the power button right on top. And that's how that's going to look on the back. Probably gonna end up keeping all 3 fans here because why not? So I just need to screw in all of these screws, but I'm gonna really quickly show you how it looks like just 1 fan. And here's how just 1 fan looks on that bracket. Definitely shows off the streamers on the back, of course. And here's the back cover. Let me just put it in real quick. And you'll notice over here, you can see that 1 fan, you can see the streamer cables running, and then all the 3 fans there as well. So something to consider. I think on the side it does look really nice. And once again, I love how easy everything pops off. All the RGBs are sharing the same color, and like I showed you earlier, the way the RGB looks on the TR120s versus the Ryujin fans are different. As you can see, they have like a very different shade. So that's one of the reasons why it looks a lot better if you just use the same fan. I'm gonna go ahead and place the 2 fans back in. All right, and with the back cover on, as you can see those 3 RGB fans. So I think that looks really nice, and you can still see port of the side fans on the bottom. So overall, I definitely love that unique touch of this GT502 Ryzen case. All right, here's how the ROG LC III 360 LCD screen looks on the GT502 Ryzen case. Now this AIO does feature a really nice 2.1-inch LCD display, which we'll take off the little plastic here. And as the name suggests, you have that nice LCD screen where you can have animations or you can upload your own custom GIFs. And here's the ROG STRIX LC III 360 LCD installed on this GT502 Ryzen. To get an idea of how this AIO will look in this setup, I do have it set up with the 4070 Ti Super as well, which is significantly smaller than the STRIX 4090. I think it's a great way to illustrate exactly how a smaller GPU will look on this GT502 Ryzen case. As well as for those that prefer more of a circular design. Now I do like the fact that this comes with a nice 2.1-inch LCD display. Nothing too massive, but it is a really nice display, and you are able to customize it as well with any type of animations like GIFs or preloaded animations like you're seeing right now. And it can also read out certain hardware information as well. So right now we're reading out the CPU and the GPU temperatures. And I think this AIO does a really great job of taming the temperatures of the 9800 X3D. It is more cost effective than the Ryujin Extreme. Keep in mind that you are losing the VRM fan, and not just the VRM fan, but of course you'll also gain a way larger display, 3.5 inches versus the 2.1 inch on the LC3. And also the pump is stronger. We have the ASUS Emma Gen 8 V2 pump versus the Gen 7 on the LC3. And another thing that you also gain with the Ryujin Extreme is you get 1 year of AIDA 64 Extreme, which does add some great value. And you also get more infographics here, so I can have free readings, for example. And this one has Jiffy integrated as well, so it's easier for you to add animations seamlessly. And I just think that it has much better graphics as well. And keep in mind that the Ryujin also has those amazing high performing 30mm fans. However, I decided to just go for the TR120s, so that way I can keep the aesthetics and the RGB looking uniform across the whole build. And finally, I want to give a huge shout out to ASUS for sending a whole bunch of their ROG and TUF Gaming components. They sent out, of course, this awesome GT502 Ryzen case, both the Ryujin Extreme and the LC3, alongside all of these beautiful TR120 fans, the TUF Gaming PSU on the back, as well as the ASUS TUF Gaming 4070 Ti Super, the X870-A gaming Wi-Fi motherboard, and the awesome ROG ASUS gaming keyboard, alongside the Heartbeat Ace mini mouse. They definitely helped make this build possible, and I'm really grateful of being able to work with ASUS to create this awesome tutorial guide for this beautiful all-white gaming PC. All these components, of course, will be listed down in the description box below, alongside with affiliate links. That does help and support the channel. I really appreciate and value the time that you spend watching this awesome tutorial build guide. Now I'm gonna roll some fire B-roll. So once again, guys, thank you so much and enjoy.